Sometimes the most powerful moments happen when we think nobody is watching. Every parent knows the weight of providing for their children, the sleepless nights wondering if tomorrow will bring opportunity or another closed door. Samantha Brooks runs a billion-dollar tech company and believes people reveal their true selves under pressure. So when she calls Lamar Green, a struggling maintenance worker and single father, into her office for what he thinks is a promotion meeting, she decides to test him. She pretends to fall asleep during his heartfelt plea, thinking he'll either give up or get angry. Hidden cameras capture everything, but Lamar does something she never expected. Believing she's truly asleep, he continues speaking from his heart, about his daughter, his dreams, and his unshakable faith. When Samantha opens her eyes, she realizes she's the one being tested. What happens next will change both their lives forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The 42nd floor of the Tech Vantage Solutions building offered a view that most people only saw in movies. From her corner office, Samantha Brooks could watch the city pulse with life below, millions of people moving through their daily routines, most of them unaware that their fates could be decided by someone like her with the stroke of a pen. At 53, Samantha had built her empire on a foundation of calculated decisions and unwavering resolve. The mahogany desk that dominated her office had witnessed countless meetings where careers were made or destroyed, where million-dollar deals were sealed with handshakes, and where she had earned her reputation as one of the most formidable CEOs in the tech industry. The walls displayed her achievements, awards, honorary degrees, photographs with world leaders and industry titans. But today, her attention was drawn to something else entirely, a small family photograph sitting on the corner of her desk, forgotten. Among the corporate accolades, the photograph belonged to her, but it felt like a relic from another life. A younger Samantha smiled back at her, standing beside parents who had worked double shifts at a textile factory just to keep food on the table. The woman in that photograph had dreamed of using business to lift people up, to create opportunities for families like her own. She had believed that success meant bringing others along for the journey. Somewhere along the way, those dreams had been replaced by different priorities. The boardroom had taught her that sentiment was weakness, that every decision must serve the bottom line, and that personal feelings had no place in corporate strategy. She had learned to see employees not as individuals with families and dreams, but as resources to be optimized, costs to be managed, and variables in an equation that always needed to balance in favor of profit. Ms. Brooks, the voice belonged to Aaliyah Martinez, her Director of Human Resources. Aaliyah was one of the few people who could enter Samantha's office without an appointment, a privilege earned through 15 years of loyal service and an uncanny ability to anticipate problems before they became crises. "Come in, Aaliyah." Samantha turned from the window, her expression settling into the composed mask she wore like armor. "I trust you have the quarterly performance reviews ready?" Aaliyah entered carrying a thick folder, her usually confident demeanor slightly subdued. "I do, but I wanted to discuss a few cases that might require your personal attention." She placed the folder on the desk and opened it to reveal dozens of employee files, each one representing a person whose future hung in the balance. "How many terminations are we looking at this quarter?" Samantha asked, her tone as casual as if she were discussing the weather. 47, based on the performance metrics you established." Aaliyah's voice carried a hint of reluctance. "But there are a few cases I think we should reconsider." Samantha raised an eyebrow. This was unusual. Aaliyah rarely questioned her decisions, understanding that efficiency and profitability were the primary concerns. "Such as Lamar Green in building maintenance. His supervisor, Shane Williams, has consistently rated him as one of our most reliable employees. He's never missed a day of work in 3 years, often stays late without overtime pay, and several Department heads have specifically requested him for their projects. The name meant nothing to Samantha. In a company of over 3,000 employees, she rarely concerned herself with individuals below the executive level. What's the issue? His productivity scores are slightly below the new benchmarks you implemented last month, but the discrepancy is minimal, and when you factor in his reliability and the quality of his work, numbers don't lie, Alea. Samantha cut her off with practiced efficiency. We established these benchmarks for a reason. If Mr. Green can't meet them, then perhaps he's not the right fit for our organization. Alea shifted uncomfortably. He's a single father with a sick daughter. His medical expenses are not our responsibility. Samantha's voice remained steady, but something flickered in her eyes. A brief shadow that might have been doubt, or perhaps just irritation at having her judgment questioned. We're running a business, not a charity. Every decision must serve the company's best interests. Down in the basement levels of the building, where the executive elevator never stopped and the mahogany-paneled walls gave way to concrete and fluorescent lighting, Lamar Green was completing his morning rounds. At 38, he moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who had learned to find dignity in work that others might overlook. His uniform was always clean and pressed, his tools organized with military precision, and his approach to each task reflected a care that went far beyond what his paycheck required. The small photograph taped to his supply cart showed a 7-year-old girl with braided hair and a gap-toothed smile that could light up any room. Zoe was his anchor, his motivation, and the reason he found strength to face each day, despite the mounting challenges that seemed to multiply like shadows. Morning, Lamar. Robin Patterson emerged from the utility room, her maintenance uniform slightly rumpled from an early morning emergency repair. At 26, she was newer to the company, but had quickly learned to appreciate Lamar's steady presence and quiet wisdom. Heard you saved the day again yesterday with that server room cooling issue. Lamar smiled, an expression that transformed his tired features and revealed the warmth that lived beneath his reserved exterior. Just doing my job. Those servers run hot, and the executives upstairs get mighty uncomfortable when their computers don't work. You're too modest. Robin shook her head. That wasn't just doing your job. You stayed until midnight figuring out that problem. Shane told me the IT department couldn't solve it in 3 hours, but you had it running again before anyone important. Noticed, the compliment made Lamar uncomfortable, as they always did. He had learned early in life that drawing attention to yourself rarely led to good things, especially when you were trying to keep your head above water in a world that seemed designed to pull people like him under. Team effort, he said simply. We all do what we can, but Robin wasn't ready to let it go. That's what I'm talking about. You never take credit, but everybody knows you're the one who keeps this place running. Half the people upstairs couldn't change a light bulb, but they act like they're more important than the folks who actually make things work. Lamar's expression grew more serious. Everyone's got their role to play. The people upstairs, they carry different kinds of pressure than we do. Different kinds of pressure? Robin's voice carried a note of skepticism. Like what? Deciding which restaurant to expense for lunch? Like deciding whether people like us get to keep our jobs? Lamar's response was quiet but firm. I don't pretend to understand their world, but I know they hold our futures in their hands. That's pressure I wouldn't want. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Shane Williams, a middle-aged man whose weathered hands and patient demeanor spoke to decades of maintenance work. As their supervisor, Shane had the thankless job of translating corporate demands into realistic expectations for his team. Lamar, I need to talk to you. Shane's tone was carefully neutral, but something in his expression suggested this wasn't a routine conversation. Robin took the hint and excused herself, leaving the two men alone in the narrow hallway, lined with supply closets and mechanical equipment. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows that seemed to emphasize the gravity of whatever Shane was about to say. You've been with us 3 years now, Shane began, his voice carrying the weight of experience and perhaps a touch of regret. "In all that time, I've never had to write you up, never had a complaint about your work, never had to question your dedication." Lamar felt his stomach tighten. Conversations that started with praise rarely ended well in his experience. "Is there a problem with my performance?" "Not from my perspective." Shane's answer was immediate and sincere. "But there are new metrics being used to evaluate employees, productivity benchmarks that don't take into account the quality of work or reliability or any of the things that actually matter in this job." The words hung in the air between them like a heavy fog. Lamar had heard rumors about changes coming down from corporate, whispers about efficiency improvements and cost-cutting measures that translated into real people losing real jobs. "What does that mean for me?" Lamar asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "It means you need to be prepared for anything." Shane's voice was gentle but honest. "And it means I'm going to do everything I can to make sure the people upstairs understand what kind of employee they'd be losing if they make a mistake." Back on the 42nd floor, Samantha was reviewing the quarterly reports when her assistant, Earl Thompson, knocked on her door. Earl was a man of few words and fewer expressions, having learned over his 20 years of service that discretion and efficiency were the qualities most valued by executives. "Ms. Brooks, you have a call from the board chair." Earl's announcement was delivered with the same neutral tone he used for all communications, whether they involved routine scheduling or potential crises. Samantha glanced at her calendar, noting that the call wasn't scheduled. Unexpected communications from the board chair usually meant one of two things, either exceptional good news or significant problems. In her experience, problems were far more common. "Put him through." She straightened in her chair, mentally preparing for whatever challenge was about to be presented. The call lasted 17 minutes and confirmed her suspicions. The board was concerned about recent quarterly projections and the need to maintain their competitive edge in an increasingly challenging market. The conversation was conducted in the careful language of corporate diplomacy, but the message was clear. Costs needed to be reduced, efficiency needed to be improved, and any personnel decisions that served those goals would have the board's full support. After ending the call, Samantha sat quietly for several minutes, her gaze drifting once again to the family photograph on her desk. The young woman in that picture seemed to be looking at her with disappointment, as if she could see what her future self had become and found it wanting. She pushed the thought away and focused on the employee files spread across her desk. Each name represented a decision that needed to be made, a life that would be affected by her judgment, a family that would either celebrate or struggle based on her choices. It was a responsibility she had learned to compartmentalize, to view through the lens of business necessity rather than human impact. But today, for reasons she couldn't quite explain, the weight of that responsibility felt heavier than usual. Perhaps it was the board's pressure, or the approaching quarterly deadline, or simply the accumulated fatigue of making difficult decisions year after year. Whatever the cause, she found herself staring at the name Lamar Green with more attention than such cases typically warranted. An idea began to form in her mind, an unusual approach that might serve multiple purposes. If she was going to make decisions that affected people's lives, perhaps it would be valuable to understand what kind of people they really were beneath the statistics and performance metrics. A test of character might reveal qualities that didn't show up in productivity reports. It was an unconventional idea, one that her business school professors would probably question, and her board members would certainly not understand. But Samantha had built her career on unconventional approaches, and her instincts rarely led her astray. She reached for her phone and dialed Earl's extension. "Earl, I need you to arrange a meeting with Lamar Green from Building Maintenance. Tell him it's regarding a potential promotion opportunity. Schedule it for tomorrow afternoon." "Yes, ma'am. Anything else you need me to prepare for the meeting?" Samantha's eyes drifted to the security monitors in her office, technology that allowed her to observe any part of the building at any time. It was a feature she had installed for security purposes, but today it might serve a different function entirely. Actually, yes, I want you to ensure the security cameras in my office are functioning properly. And Earl, this meeting is to remain confidential. No notes, no recordings in the official files, no discussion with other staff members. Understood, ma'am. As evening approached and the building began to empty of its daytime occupants, Samantha remained at her desk, reviewing files and preparing for the next day's test. She had devised what she believed to be a simple but effective way to evaluate character under pressure. By feigning disinterest, even falling asleep during their conversation, she would see how this Lamar Green responded when he thought no one was watching. Would he become angry? Would he give up? Would he take advantage of the situation somehow? The test would reveal his true nature and help her make a more informed decision about his future with the company. What Samantha couldn't have predicted was that her test would reveal far more about herself than about the man she intended to evaluate. In her carefully controlled corporate world, where every interaction was managed and every outcome could be anticipated, she was about to encounter something that would challenge every assumption she had made about strength, character, and what it truly meant to succeed. The stage was set for a confrontation between two worlds, one built on power and control, the other sustained by hope and dignity. Neither participant fully understood what they were about to experience, but both would emerge forever changed by a conversation that would begin as manipulation and end as transformation. The words hung in the air between them like a heavy fog. Lamar had heard rumors about changes coming down from corporate, whispers about efficiency improvements and cost-cutting measures that translated into real people losing real jobs. What does that mean for me? Lamar asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. It means you need to be prepared for anything. Shane's voice was gentle but honest. And it means I'm going to do everything I can to make sure the people upstairs understand what kind of employee they'd be losing if they make a mistake. Back on the 42nd floor, Samantha was reviewing the quarterly reports when her assistant, Earl Thompson, knocked on her door. Earl was a man of few words and fewer expressions, having learned over his 20 years of service that discretion and efficiency were the qualities most valued by executives. "Ms. Brooks, you have a call from the board chair." Earl's announcement was delivered with the same neutral tone he used for all communications, whether they involved routine scheduling or potential crises. Samantha glanced at her calendar, noting that the call wasn't scheduled. Unexpected communications from the board chair usually meant one of two things, either exceptional good news or significant problems. In her experience, problems were far more common. Put him through. She straightened in her chair, mentally preparing for whatever challenge was about to be presented. The call lasted 17 minutes and confirmed her suspicions. The board was concerned about recent quarterly projections and the need to maintain their competitive edge in an increasingly challenging market. The conversation was conducted in the careful language of corporate diplomacy, but the message was clear. Costs needed to be reduced, efficiency needed to be improved, and any personnel decisions that served those goals would have the board's full support. After ending the call, Samantha sat quietly for several minutes, her gaze drifting once again to the family photograph on her desk. The young woman in that picture seemed to be looking at her with disappointment, as if she could see what her future self had become and found it wanting. She pushed the thought away and focused on the employee files spread across her desk. Each name represented a decision that needed to be made, a life that would be affected by her judgment, a family that would either celebrate or struggle based on her choices. It was a responsibility she had learned to compartmentalize, to view through the lens of business necessity rather than human impact. But today, for reasons she couldn't quite explain, The weight of that responsibility felt heavier than usual. Perhaps it was the board's pressure, or the approaching quarterly deadline, or simply the accumulated fatigue of making difficult decisions year after year. Whatever the cause, she found herself staring at the name Lamar Green with more attention than such cases typically warranted. An idea began to form in her mind, an unusual approach that might serve multiple purposes. If she was going to make decisions that affected people's lives, perhaps it would be valuable to understand what kind of people they really were beneath the statistics and performance metrics. A test of character might reveal qualities that didn't show up in productivity reports. It was an unconventional idea, one that her business school professors would probably question and her board members would certainly not understand. But Samantha had built her career on unconventional approaches, and her instincts rarely led her astray. She reached for her phone and dialed Earl's extension. "Earl, I need you to arrange a meeting with Lamar Green from building maintenance. Tell him it's regarding a potential promotion opportunity. Schedule it for tomorrow afternoon." "Yes, ma'am. Anything else you need me to prepare for the meeting?" Samantha's eyes drifted to the security monitors in her office, technology that allowed her to observe any part of the building at any time. It was a feature she had installed for security purposes, but today it might serve a different function entirely. "Actually, yes. I want you to ensure the security cameras in my office are functioning properly. And, Earl, this meeting is to remain confidential. No notes, no recordings in the official files, no discussion with other staff members." "Understood, ma'am." As evening approached and the building began to empty of its daytime occupants, Samantha remained at her desk, reviewing files and preparing for the next day's test. She had devised what she believed to be a simple but effective way to evaluate character under pressure. By feigning disinterest, even falling asleep during their conversation, she would see how this Lamar Green responded when he thought no one was watching. Would he become angry? Would he give up? Would he take advantage of the situation somehow? The test would reveal his true nature and help her make a more informed decision about his future with the company. What Samantha couldn't have predicted was that her test would reveal far more about herself than about the man she intended to evaluate. In her carefully controlled corporate world, where every interaction was managed and every outcome could be anticipated, she was about to encounter something that would challenge every assumption she had made about strength, character, and what it truly meant to succeed. The stage was set for a confrontation between two worlds, one built on power and control, the other sustained by hope and dignity. Neither participant fully understood what they were about to experience, but both would emerge forever changed by a conversation that would begin as manipulation and end as transformation. The call came at 11:37 on a Tuesday morning, interrupting Lamar's routine inspection of the building's HVAC systems. He was 3 floors underground, surrounded by the mechanical heartbeat of the building, the hum of generators, the whisper of air circulation, the steady pulse of systems that kept thousands of people comfortable while they worked above. "Lamar Green, please report to the security desk immediately." The voice crackling through the building's intercom system was professional, but urgent enough to make his stomach tighten with familiar anxiety. Unexpected summons rarely brought good news. In his experience, in the 3 years since he had started working at TechVantage Solutions, he had learned that calls to the security desk usually meant one of 3 things: a problem with his work, a problem with his background check, or a problem with his employment. His status. None of those possibilities offered much comfort. Robin looked up from the electrical panel she was troubleshooting, her expression reflecting the same concern that was probably visible on his face. "You know what that's about?" Lamar shook his head, already removing his work gloves and straightening his uniform shirt. "No idea, but I guess I'll find out." He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Keep an eye on that compressor on level 3. It's been running hot lately." The elevator ride to the main floor gave him time to mentally review the past few weeks, searching for anything that might have triggered this summons. His work had been solid, his interactions with other employees professional and helpful, and he had stayed well within all company policies, but experience had taught him that innocent explanations were often luxuries that people in his position couldn't afford. Earl Thompson was waiting for him at the security desk, his expression as unreadable as always. The older man had the demeanor of someone who had seen everything the corporate world had to offer, and had learned not to be surprised by any of it. Mr. Green. Earl's greeting was formal, but not unfriendly. Ms. Brooks would like to see you. In her office, the words hit Lamar like a physical blow. Samantha Brooks, the CEO, the woman whose name appeared on company communications and whose photograph graced the lobby wall alongside other corporate executives. In 3 years of employment, he had never been in the same room with her, never had reason to interact with anyone above the level of his immediate supervisor. Did she say what this is about? Lamar's voice was carefully controlled, but he could feel his heart rate increasing. She mentioned a potential promotion opportunity. Earl's tone remained neutral, giving no indication of whether he believed this explanation or viewed it with the same skepticism that was now flooding Lamar's mind. A promotion opportunity. The words should have filled him with hope, but instead they triggered a deep wariness born from too many disappointments. In his experience, when something seemed too good to be true, it usually was. But he also knew that refusing a direct summons from the CEO would be career suicide, regardless of the reason behind it. "I'll need to clean up first," Lamar said, gesturing to his work uniform and the inevitable smudges that came from maintaining building systems. Earl nodded toward the executive restroom near the lobby. "Take your time. Ms. Brooks is expecting you at 2 o'clock. The next 2 hours passed. With excruciating slowness, Lamar tried to focus on his work, but his mind kept drifting to the upcoming meeting and the dozens of possible explanations for why the CEO of a billion-dollar company would want to speak with a maintenance worker. He called Shane to inform him about the meeting, receiving only a grunt of acknowledgement that somehow conveyed both surprise and concern. At 1:45, Lamar stood in the executive restroom, studying his reflection in a mirror that probably cost more than his monthly rent. He had changed into his cleanest uniform shirt and used the provided mouthwash and cologne, but he still felt out of place in the marble-appointed space with its gold fixtures and soft lighting. The elevator to the executive floors required a special key card, which Earl provided with instructions to proceed directly to the 42nd floor. As the elevator climbed, Lamar watched the numbers increase and felt as though he was ascending into a different world entirely, one where decisions were made that affected thousands of lives, where millions of dollars changed hands with handshakes, where power was concentrated in the hands of people he had only read about in company newsletters. The executive floor was everything he had imagined and more. The hallways were lined with original artwork. The carpet was thick enough to muffle every footstep, and the windows offered views of the city that seemed to stretch on forever. The few people he encountered, assistants, junior executives, administrative staff, moved with the quiet confidence of those who worked at the center of power. Samantha Brooks's office occupied the corner of the building, its glass walls offering panoramic views that made Lamar feel simultaneously awed and insignificant. The space was larger than his entire apartment, furnished with the kind of understated elegance that spoke of wealth so secure it didn't need to announce itself. The woman behind the massive desk looked exactly like her corporate photographs, but with a presence that couldn't be captured in any image. She was immaculately dressed in a charcoal business suit, her silver hair styled in a way that projected both authority and sophistication. When she looked up from her computer, her gaze was direct and assessing, the look of someone accustomed to making quick judgments about people. "Mr. Green," Her voice was crisp and professional, neither warm nor cold. "Please, have a seat." Lamar chose the chair closest to her desk, noting how the leather upholstery seemed to embrace him with expensive comfort. The entire setting felt surreal, as if he had stepped into someone else's life and was now expected to play a role he didn't understand. "I've been reviewing your employment record," Samantha began, opening a file that Lamar recognized as his personnel folder. 3 years with the company. Consistently positive reviews from your supervisor, no disciplinary actions, and several commendations for going above and beyond your assigned duties. Lamar nodded, unsure whether a response was expected or if he should remain silent and let her continue. "Your supervisor speaks very highly of your work ethic and reliability." She turned a page in the file, her expression giving no indication of her thoughts. "Which is why I wanted to speak with you about a potential opportunity within our organization." The words hung in the air between them, and Lamar felt a surge of hope that he immediately tried to suppress. Hope was dangerous when you lived paycheck to paycheck and had a daughter whose medical needs demanded constant financial juggling. "I appreciate your consideration, ma'am," he said carefully. "I enjoy my work here and would welcome any opportunity to contribute more to the company's success." Samantha nodded, making a note on a pad beside her keyboard. "Tell me about your goals, Mr. Green. Where do you see yourself in 5 years?" The question caught him off guard. It had been so long since anyone had asked him about his aspirations that he almost didn't know how to respond. His goals had been reduced to basic survival, keeping his job, paying his bills, making sure Zoe had everything she needed. Dreams beyond those immediate necessities felt like luxuries he couldn't afford. But something about the setting, about the unexpected opportunity, about the simple fact that someone was finally asking, all of it combined to unlock something in him that he had kept carefully controlled for years. "I want to build something better for my daughter," he began, his voice growing stronger as he spoke. "I want her to grow up knowing that hard work and dedication matter, that education can open doors, that there's always hope for something better. I've been taking night classes in business administration when I can afford them, learning about operations management and efficiency systems." Samantha's pen moved across her notepad, but her expression remained unreadable. "And what motivates you to excel in your current position?" "Pride," Lamar answered without hesitation. "Pride in doing good work, pride in being someone others can count on, pride in being part of something bigger than myself. Every system I maintain, every problem I solve, it matters to the people who work here. They may not know my name, but their comfort and productivity depend on me doing my job well." As he spoke, Lamar noticed something strange. Samantha's note-taking had slowed, and her eyelids seemed to be growing heavy. Her head tilted slightly forward, and her breathing became deeper and more regular. Within moments, it became apparent that she had fallen asleep in her chair. Lamar stopped mid-sentence, unsure how to respond to this unexpected development. He sat in silence for nearly a minute, watching the woman who held his future in her hands as she slept peacefully behind her massive desk. The situation was so bizarre that he almost wondered if it was some kind of test or corporate procedure he didn't understand. But as the silence stretched on and her breathing remained steady and deep, he realized that this wasn't intentional. The CEO of TechVantage Solutions had simply fallen asleep during their meeting, leaving him alone with his thoughts and his dreams in the most powerful office in the building. What happened next would surprise them both. Hidden cameras throughout. The office continued recording, capturing every word and gesture as an extraordinary conversation began, one that would challenge everything both participants thought they knew about power, dignity, and what it truly meant to be heard. For a long moment, Lamar simply sat in the expensive leather chair, watching Samantha Brooks sleep and trying to process the surreal nature of his situation. The woman who could determine his family's future with a single decision, had dozed off in the middle of what was supposed to be the most important conversation of his professional life. His first instinct was to remain silent and wait for her. To wake up naturally. That seemed like the safest course of action, respectful, professional, and unlikely to create any additional complications. But as the minutes ticked by and her breathing remained deep and steady, something unexpected began to happen. The office, which had initially felt intimidating and foreign, began to seem almost peaceful. The afternoon sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows created warm patterns on the carpet, and the distant hum of city traffic far below provided a gentle background rhythm. For the first time since entering this rarefied corporate atmosphere, Lamar felt a measure of calm. And in that calm, words began to flow from him, words that he had never intended to speak, thoughts that he had kept carefully guarded, dreams that he had learned not to voice because they made him too vulnerable. "I know you probably can't hear me right now, Miss Brooks," he began quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "But maybe that's for the best. There are things I've wanted to say to someone in your position for a long time, and I never thought I'd get the chance." He paused, glancing around the opulent office with its awards and accolades, its symbols of power and achievement. "You want to know about my goals? My real goals? I want my daughter to never have to choose between buying groceries and buying her medication. I want her to grow up in a world where her worth isn't determined by how much money her father makes, or what neighborhood she comes from." Behind her closed eyelids, Samantha's mind was far from peaceful. She was acutely aware of every word Lamar spoke, every emotion that colored his voice, every truth that he was revealing in what he believed to be a moment of privacy. The test she had designed to evaluate his character was working, but not in the way she had anticipated. She had expected him to react to her apparent disinterest with frustration or anger. She had thought he might try to wake her, or perhaps give up and leave, or maybe even take advantage of the situation somehow. Instead, he was offering her something far more valuable and dangerous: genuine honesty. 3 years I've worked in this building," Lamar continued, his voice growing slightly stronger. 3 years of arriving early, staying late, fixing things. That break, maintaining systems that keep this place running. And in all that time, I've been invisible, not because I wanted to be, but because that's how people like you see people like me. The words struck Samantha with unexpected force. She had indeed seen him as invisible, not as a deliberate slight, but as a natural consequence of the hierarchical structure that separated executives from maintenance staff. She had never considered that this invisibility might be painful for those who experienced it. "I don't blame you for that," Lamar said, as if reading her thoughts. "I understand how organizations work. You deal with budgets and strategies and board meetings. You can't know every employee personally. But sometimes I wonder if you know what it costs people like me to be invisible." In the security office, 3 floors below, Earl Thompson was watching the monitor that displayed Samantha's office with growing confusion. He had been tasked with maintaining the recording equipment and ensuring that the CEO's unusual test proceeded without interruption. But what he was witnessing didn't match any scenario he had imagined. The man on the screen wasn't taking advantage of his boss's apparent vulnerability. He wasn't rifling through her desk or trying to access her computer. He wasn't even trying to wake her up. Instead, he was speaking with a quiet dignity that Earl found both surprising and deeply moving. "I've got a 7-year-old daughter named Zoe," Lamar was saying. "She's the smartest person I know and the bravest. When she was 5, the doctors told her she had a rare autoimmune condition. The medication she needs costs more than I make in a month, but somehow we manage. We budget and sacrifice and pray, and somehow we always find a way." Samantha felt a tightness in her chest that she didn't recognize at first. It had been years since she had thought about medical bills or prescription costs, or the kind of financial stress that turned basic health care into a luxury. Her own daughter, now grown and living on the West Coast, had never wanted for anything. The contrast was stark and uncomfortable. Zoe asked me something last week that I'm still thinking about, Lamar continued. She wanted to know why some people have so much money that they don't know what to do with it, while other people work harder than anyone and still can't afford the things they need. I tried to explain about different kinds of jobs and education and opportunities, but the truth is, I don't really understand it myself. The question hung in the air of the silent office, a challenge that Samantha had never been forced to confront directly. She had built her wealth through intelligence, determination, and strategic thinking, but she had also benefited from advantages that she rarely acknowledged: family connections, quality education, and the simple privilege of never having to choose between medication and meals. "The thing is," Lamar said, his voice taking on a different quality, stronger, more determined, "I don't want to change the world. I don't need to be rich or famous or powerful. I just want a fair chance. I want the opportunity to prove what I can do when someone believes in me. I want my daughter to see that hard work and honesty and treating people with respect actually matters." In the HR department, Alea Martinez was reviewing the employee files that Samantha had requested, paying particular attention to the documentation surrounding Lamar Green's employment. What she found troubled her more than she had expected. His performance evaluations were consistently excellent, with multiple supervisors noting his reliability, skill, and positive attitude. His attendance record was perfect, not a single unexcused absence in 3 years. Several departments had specifically requested his services for important projects, and he had consistently delivered results ahead of schedule and under budget. But buried in the file were other documents that painted a different picture of his experience at TechVantage Solutions. Requests for additional training had been denied. Applications for internal job postings had been rejected without explanation. Recommendations for merit increases had been overruled by corporate policies that seemed designed to keep certain employees in their current positions indefinitely. Alea had seen this pattern before, and it always left her feeling complicit in a system that she knew was fundamentally unfair. The company's diversity and inclusion policies looked impressive on paper, but the reality was that advancement opportunities remained largely limited to employees who fit certain demographic and socio-economic profiles. Back in the CEO's office, Lamar had begun to share more personal details about his life, unaware that his words were being recorded and witnessed by someone who had the power to change everything. "I grew up in a house where we knew the difference between needs and wants," he said. "My parents worked multiple jobs just to keep us fed and housed, and I learned early that complaining doesn't fix anything. You either find a way to make things better, or you accept what you have and try to be grateful for it." The philosophy behind his words reflected a wisdom born from necessity, an understanding of resilience that couldn't be taught in business schools or leadership seminars. Samantha realized that she was listening to someone who had developed strength not from power or privilege, but from facing challenges that would have broken many people. "But I'll tell you something, Ms. Brooks," Lamar continued, his voice growing more passionate. "I've never asked for a handout or a favor or special treatment. All I've ever wanted is the chance to earn what I need through honest work and dedication. I want to succeed because I've proven I deserve it, not because someone felt sorry for me." The pride in his voice was unmistakable, and it forced Samantha to confront an uncomfortable truth about her own assumptions. She had been prepared to view him as a charity case, someone who needed her benevolence to succeed. Instead, she was discovering someone who possessed a dignity and strength that her wealth and position had never required her to develop. As Lamar continued speaking to what he believed was an empty room, Samantha found herself facing a question that would challenge everything she thought she knew about success, character, and what it truly meant to be powerful. Lamar reached into his wallet, a worn leather artifact that had seen better days, and pulled out several folded papers that had been handled so many times they felt soft as fabric. The sound of crinkling paper seemed unusually loud in the quiet office as he carefully unfolded what were clearly medical bills and insurance statements. "I want to show you something, Ms. Brooks," he said softly, even though she appeared to be deep in sleep. "I carry these with me because they remind me why I can't afford to give up." He held up the first document, a hospital bill from Zoe's most recent emergency room visit. The total amount due was more than he earned in 2 months, and even with insurance, his portion was still devastating to a family living paycheck to paycheck. "This one's from last month, when Zoe had a reaction to her medication," he explained, his voice thick with emotion. "The doctors had to adjust her treatment, which meant 3 days in the hospital and a whole new set of prescriptions. The insurance company said it was a pre-existing condition complication, which apparently means they can charge us whatever they want." Behind her closed eyelids, Samantha felt a weight settling in her chest that had nothing to do with physical discomfort. She had approved healthcare plans for the company that prioritized cost savings over comprehensive coverage, viewing employee medical expenses as line items to be minimized rather than human needs to be met. Lamar unfolded another document, this one showing a payment plan for ongoing treatment. The monthly amount was carefully highlighted in yellow, a sum that represented groceries and utilities and school supplies that had to be sacrificed to keep his daughter healthy. "I work 40 hours a week here, plus 20 hours at a gas station on weekends, plus whatever odd jobs I can pick up in the evenings," he continued. "And it's still not enough. Every month I have to choose between paying the full amount on these bills or making sure Zoe has what she needs for school. Every single month, the mathematics of poverty were laid out before them in black and white, a stark accounting of the impossible choices that millions of families faced, while the people who made corporate policy decisions never had to consider such trade-offs." "You know what the hardest part is?" Lamar asked, refolding the papers with practiced care. "It's not the long hours or the stress or even the fear of not being able to pay for her treatment. It's having to explain to a 7-year-old why we can't do things that other families take for granted." Samantha's mind drifted to her own childhood, to memories she had buried beneath years of corporate success and financial security. She remembered her mother's careful budgeting, the way her parents would speak in whispers about bills and expenses, the feeling of being different from classmates whose families never seemed to worry about money. But those memories felt distant and abstract compared to what Lamar was describing. Her family's struggles had been temporary, a stepping stone to something better. For him, the struggle seemed to be a permanent condition, with no clear path to improvement, despite his tireless efforts. "Last week, Zoe's class was talking about Career Day," Lamar continued, his voice carrying a mixture of pride and pain. "She told them her daddy fixes things and makes sure people are comfortable at work. When her teacher asked what she wanted to be when she grows up, she said she wanted to be like me, someone who helps other people and works hard and never gives up." The innocence and wisdom in his daughter's response struck Samantha with unexpected force. In corporate boardrooms, success was measured in quarterly profits and stock prices and market share. But here was a child who understood that success could also be measured in dedication, service, and perseverance. "That night she asked me if being good at your job means you get promoted and make more money," Lamar said, his voice growing quieter. "I didn't know how to answer her, because the truth is, I've been good at my job for 3 years, and I'm still in the same position I started in. I've applied for advancement opportunities, taken every training course available, done everything the employee handbook says leads to career growth. But somehow the promotions always go to other people." The pattern he described was one that Samantha was dimly aware of, but had never examined closely. Advancement opportunities did tend to follow predictable paths, often favoring employees who fit certain profiles or had certain connections. She had told herself that this was simply how meritocracy worked. The best candidates rose to the top, naturally. But listening to Lamar's experience, she began to wonder if merit was being measured fairly, or if the system was designed in ways that prevented certain people from ever truly competing on equal terms. "I don't want charity," Lamar emphasized, his voice growing stronger. "I've never wanted charity. What I want is the chance to earn my way to something better. I want the opportunity to prove that dedication and hard work and treating people with respect are worth something in this world." In the basement levels of the building, Robin Patterson and Shane Williams were having their own conversation about Lamar's unusual summons to the executive floor. Both of them had worked in corporate environments long enough to understand that such meetings rarely resulted in good news for maintenance workers. "He's the best employee I've had in 20 years, Shane was saying, his voice heavy with concern. "If they're looking to cut costs by getting rid of good people, this company is making a mistake they'll regret." Robin nodded, thinking about all the times Lamar had covered extra shifts, solved problems that stumped more senior technicians, and helped train new employees without being asked. Maybe it really is about a promotion. Maybe someone finally noticed what he brings to this place. "Maybe," Shane replied, but his tone suggested he wasn't optimistic. "Or maybe someone's decided that 3 years of perfect performance reviews don't matter if the spreadsheets say his productivity numbers are 2% below some arbitrary benchmark." Their conversation reflected a truth that was playing out across corporate America. The tension between human value and statistical efficiency, between recognizing individual worth and optimizing systems for maximum profit. Back in the CEO's office, Lamar was sharing memories that revealed the depth of his character and the source of his unshakable determination. "When Zoe was first diagnosed, the doctor told us that with proper treatment she could live a completely normal life," he said. "But proper treatment costs more money than most people see in a year. That night I sat in my car in the hospital parking garage and cried harder than I had since I was a child. The vulnerability in his admission was profound. Here was a man who had learned to project strength and competence in all his professional interactions, revealing a moment of complete despair to someone he believed couldn't hear him. But then I thought about my own father," Lamar continued. "He worked construction for 30 years, came home every day covered in concrete dust and exhausted to his bones. But he never complained, never made excuses, never let us see him give up. He used to tell me that a man's character isn't measured by how much money he makes or what title he holds. It's measured by what he's willing to sacrifice for the people he loves." Samantha found herself thinking about her own father, a man who had worked in a textile factory and come home every evening tired but proud. He had taught her about persistence and determination, but somewhere along the way, those lessons had been overshadowed by newer teachings about competitive advantage and maximizing shareholder value. "So I made a promise that night," Lamar said, his voice filled with quiet resolve. "I promised that I would find a way to give Zoe everything she needs, no matter what it costs me. I would work as many jobs as necessary, learn whatever skills I had to learn, and never stop believing that honest effort eventually gets rewarded." The faith implicit in that promise was both inspiring and heartbreaking. He believed in a world where merit was recognized and rewarded, where hard work led to opportunity, where doing the right thing mattered more than playing political games. It was a worldview that Samantha had once shared, but had gradually abandoned as naive and impractical. 3 years later, I'm still keeping that promise, Lamar concluded. Some days it feels impossible, but I keep going because giving up isn't an option. Not for her. Not when she's counting on me to show her that good people don't finish last. That character matters more than connections, that there's always hope for something better. As his words faded into silence, Samantha felt something shifting inside her, a recognition that the test she had designed to evaluate his character had instead revealed profound truths about her own. The man sitting across from her possessed qualities that all her wealth and power had never taught her to value properly: genuine integrity, selfless love, and an unshakable belief in the possibility of justice. For the first time in years, she found herself questioning not just individual business decisions, but the entire philosophical framework that had guided her corporate success. The conversation was far from over, but already she sensed that neither of them would emerge unchanged from this extraordinary encounter. As Lamar paused in his monologue, Samantha's gaze drifted to the polished brass plaque mounted on the wall. Behind her desk, the company mission statement was engraved in elegant script: TechVantage Solutions, empowering innovation, building tomorrow, transforming lives through technology. The words had been carefully crafted by a marketing team and approved by the board of directors, designed to project an image of corporate responsibility and humanitarian purpose. But as she listened to Lamar describe his daughter's dreams and struggles, the mission statement began to feel like an indictment rather than an inspiration. How many lives were they actually transforming? And for whom were they building tomorrow? "You know what Zoe wants to be when she grows up?" Lamar asked, his voice brightening with unmistakable pride. "A biomedical engineer. She wants to design better medical devices that don't cost so much money that families like ours can't afford them. She's 7 years old, and she's already thinking about how to solve the problems that affect people like us." The sophistication of his daughters' thinking struck Samantha as remarkable. Most 7-year-olds dreamed of being astronauts or movie stars or professional athletes. But this child was already grappling with questions of social justice and economic inequality, developing aspirations that combined personal ambition with humanitarian purpose. She reads everything she can get her hands on about science and medicine. Lamar continued, "The public library has become our second home because she's already finished all the science books in her school library. Last month, she explained to me how her medication works at the cellular level. I barely understood half of what she said, but I could see her mind working, making connections, figuring things out." Samantha thought about her own daughter who had attended the finest private schools and had access to every educational opportunity that money could provide. Despite all those advantages, she had never shown the kind of intellectual curiosity and purposeful thinking that Lamar was describing. The contrast was both humbling and revealing. "The thing that amazes me most about her," Lamar said, "is that she never complains, never asks why she has to take medicine when other kids don't, never gets angry about the things we can't afford, never seems to feel sorry for herself. She just accepts what is and focuses on what she can do to make things better." Behind her closed eyelids, Samantha found herself remembering her own childhood and the lessons her parents had tried to teach her about resilience and gratitude. But those lessons had been theoretical for her. Her family's struggles had been temporary and eventually overcome. For Zoe, resilience wasn't a character-building exercise, it was a daily necessity. "Sometimes I worry that I'm asking too much of her," Lamar admitted, his voice growing softer. "She's still just a little girl, and she shouldn't have to think about money and insurance and medical bills, but she sees everything, understands more than I wish she did, and somehow she stays positive and hopeful despite it all." The weight of parental responsibility, in his words, was profound. Samantha remembered the luxury of being able to shield her own daughter from adult concerns, the privilege of preserving childhood innocence without worrying about practical necessities. For Lamar, that kind of protection was an unaffordable luxury. Last week, she asked me why some people get to go to private schools with small classes and lots of resources, while other kids have to go to schools where the teachers don't have enough supplies, and there aren't enough books to go around, Lamar continued. "I tried to explain about property taxes and funding formulas, but the whole system sounds crazy when you're trying to explain it to a child." The question was one that Samantha had never been forced to confront directly. Her own daughter had attended elite private schools as a matter of course, and she had never questioned the fairness of a system that provided dramatically different educational opportunities based on family wealth. It had simply been part of the natural order of things. "But you know what she said to me?" Lamar asked, his voice carrying a note of wonder. "She said maybe when she becomes a biomedical engineer, she can also help design better schools and learning systems. She wants to figure out ways to make sure all kids get the same chances to learn and grow and discover what they're good at." The scope of his daughter's ambitions was breathtaking. Not just personal success, but systemic change that would benefit others facing similar challenges. At 7 years old, she was already thinking about problems that most adults preferred to ignore, developing solutions that combine technical innovation with social justice. In her office 3 floors below, Alea Martinez was conducting her own review of the company's educational assistance programs and professional development opportunities. What she discovered was a pattern that troubled her deeply. Resources and opportunities were consistently directed toward employees who already had advantages, while those who needed support most were systematically excluded. The company offered tuition reimbursement for higher education, but only for employees who could afford to pay up front and wait for reimbursement. They provided professional development courses, but only during business hours when hourly workers couldn't attend. Without losing pay, they offered mentorship programs, but participants were selected through processes that favored employees with existing connections to management. Every policy was designed in ways that appeared fair on paper, but functioned to perpetuate existing inequalities. The employees who most needed opportunities for advancement were the least likely to receive them, while those who already had advantages continued to accumulate more. Back in the CEO's office, Lamar was sharing more details about his efforts to create opportunities for his daughter despite their financial constraints. "I've been saving every spare dollar for her college fund," he said. "It's not much, maybe $50 a month when things are good, sometimes nothing when the medical bills get too high. At this rate, it'll take 20 years to save enough for one semester at a decent university." The mathematics of educational inequality were stark and unforgiving. While Samantha had been able to pay for her daughter's education without thinking twice about the cost, Lamar was calculating decades of sacrifice just to give his child a fraction of the same opportunities. "But I refuse to believe that her potential should be limited by my bank account," Lamar continued, his voice growing more determined. "She's brilliant and curious and compassionate, and those qualities don't depend on how much money her father makes. If I have to work 3 jobs for the next 15 years to give her the education she deserves, then that's what I'll do." The conviction in his voice was absolute, but Samantha could hear the exhaustion beneath it, the weariness of someone who was already working at the limits of human endurance and facing the prospect of sustaining that effort for years to come. "Sometimes I think about what it would mean if someone just gave her a chance," Lamar said quietly. "Not charity, not a handout, but a real opportunity to show what she can do. A scholarship or a mentorship program, or even just access to better educational resources. The return on that investment would be incredible. She'd spend her whole life trying to pay it forward." His words carried an implicit challenge to every assumption that Samantha had made about talent, potential, and the distribution of opportunities. She had built her career in a world that claimed to reward merit, but she was beginning to understand that merit couldn't be properly evaluated when the starting points were so dramatically different. As Lamar continued speaking about his daughter's dreams and his own determination to support them, Samantha found herself imagining a different world, one where a child's potential wasn't constrained by their family's economic circumstances, where brilliant minds like Zoe's were nurtured regardless of their background. where companies like hers actively sought to identify and develop talent wherever it might be found. It was a vision that challenged everything she had been taught about business and success, but it was also becoming increasingly difficult to dismiss. Deep in the recesses of her memory, Samantha found herself remembering a diary entry she had written 35 years ago. She had been 17 then, a scholarship student at an elite prep school, surrounded by classmates whose families owned vacation homes and private jets, while she wore the same 3 outfits in careful rotation and pretended not to notice the difference. The diary entry had been written after a particularly difficult day when a classmate had casually mentioned spending more on a weekend shopping trip than Samantha's family earned in a month. That night, she had poured her frustration and dreams onto the page in passionate, idealistic prose that now seemed to belong to a different person entirely. "When I'm successful," she had written, "I'm going to create opportunities for people. Like my parents, I'm going to build a company that proves you can be profitable and principled at the same time. I'm going to make sure that talent and hard work matter more than connections and privilege." The memory was sharp and uncomfortable, forcing her to confront the vast distance between her teenage aspirations and her current reality. Somewhere in the climb to the top, those idealistic goals had been quietly abandoned, replaced by more pragmatic objectives about market share and quarterly earnings and shareholder value. Meanwhile, Lamar was describing his daughter's recent achievements with the kind of detailed pride that only parents understand. "Last month, her teacher told me that Zoe's reading at a high school level," he said, his voice warm with affection and amazement. "She's been checking out college textbooks from the library and actually understanding them. When I asked her why she chooses such difficult books, she said she wants to learn everything she can while she's young, so she can help more people when she grows up." The precociousness he described was remarkable, but what struck Samantha most was the purposefulness behind it. His daughter wasn't just academically gifted, she was driven by a sense of mission that most adults never developed. At 7, she was already thinking about how to use her talents in service of others. She started a little notebook where she writes down problems she wants to solve, Lamar continued. Medical devices that cost too much, schools that don't have enough resources, neighborhoods where kids don't have safe places to play. She treats it like a research project, drawing diagrams and writing out her ideas in that careful handwriting that kids have. Samantha thought about the philanthropic activities that filled her own calendar, charity galas and fundraising dinners and board meetings for various causes. But those activities had become social obligations rather than genuine expressions of compassion, ways to network with other wealthy individuals while maintaining a veneer of civic responsibility. The contrast with Zoe's authentic desire to help others was stark and humbling. "The other day she asked me something that I'm still thinking about," Lamar said. "She wanted to know why rich people don't share more of their money with people who need it. Not by force, but just because it seems like the right thing to do. She couldn't understand why someone would need 10 houses when other families don't have one." The question was delivered without judgment or malice, but it cut to the heart of assumptions that Samantha had never seriously examined. She owned 3 homes herself, the penthouse apartment in the city, the estate in the Hamptons, and the ski lodge in Colorado. She had purchased them as investments and status symbols, but had she ever considered the moral implications of such excess? "I tried to explain about economics and incentives and the way the system works," Lamar continued, "but when you're talking to a 7-year-old, those explanations start to sound pretty hollow. She just looked at me with those big eyes and asked if the system was working right, if good people couldn't afford medicine for their children." Out of the mouths of babes, Samantha thought. The child's question was more penetrating than any critique. She had heard from business school professors or corporate consultants. It forced her to consider whether the economic system that had made her wealthy was fundamentally just or simply efficient at concentrating resources in the hands of those who already had advantages. In the security office, Earl was becoming increasingly uncomfortable with his role as witness to this extraordinary conversation. He had worked for wealthy executives for over 20 years and had developed a professional detachment from their personal lives and business decisions. But watching Lamar speak with such honesty and vulnerability while his boss maintained her deception was troubling him in ways he hadn't anticipated. The man on the screen possessed a dignity and grace that commanded respect, even from someone watching through a hidden camera. His love for his daughter was evident in every word, his integrity unquestionable, his character unassailable. Earl found himself hoping that this test would end with recognition and opportunity rather than disappointment and termination. Back in the CEO's office, Lamar was reflecting on the broader implications of his family's struggles and what they revealed about society's values. "I've been thinking lately about what we teach our children about success," he said thoughtfully. "Zoe sees people on television and in magazines who are famous for being wealthy, and she asks me what they did to earn that wealth. Sometimes I honestly don't know how to answer her." The observation was more profound than it might have seemed. In a culture that celebrated wealth as an end in itself, regardless of how it was acquired or how it was used, what lessons were children learning about merit, contribution, and social responsibility? Then she sees people like her teachers, who work incredibly hard and make a real difference in children's lives, but who have to buy classroom supplies with their own money because the school can't afford them. She sees nurses and firefighters and social workers, people who dedicate their lives to helping others, and she notices that they're not the ones driving expensive cars or living in big houses. The contradiction he highlighted was one that Samantha had learned to ignore through years of corporate conditioning. She had been taught that market forces automatically directed resources to their most valuable uses, that financial success was evidence of social contribution. But Lamar's daughter was seeing through that comfortable fiction with the clarity that sometimes only children possess. She's starting to understand that the world doesn't always reward the right things, Lamar said sadly, and I'm struggling with how to help her maintain her idealism and hope while also preparing her for the reality of how things actually work. The parental dilemma he described was heartbreaking, trying to preserve a child's faith in justice and fairness while teaching her to navigate a world that often operated according to very different principles. It was a challenge that Samantha had never had to face because her daughter had been born into privilege and had never needed to question the fairness of the system. "But you know what gives me hope?" Lamar asked, his voice brightening again. "Kids like Zoe are asking these questions. They're not accepting inequality as natural or inevitable. They're imagining different ways of organizing society, different ways of thinking about success and value and what we owe each other." His optimism was infectious, even though Samantha was only experiencing it as an unwilling eavesdropper. The idea that the next generation might be more compassionate and justice-oriented than her own was both inspiring and challenging. Inspiring, because it suggested the possibility of positive change. Challenging, because it implied criticism of the choices her generation had made. "Maybe that's my real job as her father," Lamar concluded. "Not just to provide for her material needs, but to help her hold on to that sense of justice and compassion as she grows up. To make sure she never loses that instinct to help others, even when the world tells her that looking out for herself is more practical." As his words settled into the silence of the office, Samantha felt a profound shift in her understanding of what it meant to be successful. For decades, she had measured her achievements in terms of personal accumulation, wealth, power, recognition, status. But listening to Lamar talk about his daughter, she began to wonder if the most important legacy might be something entirely different. The values we pass on, the examples we set, and the kind of world we leave behind for the next generation. As Lamar's voice faded into contemplative silence, Samantha's eyes fell upon a sealed envelope sitting on the corner of her desk. an envelope that suddenly seemed to weigh more than all the awards and accolades that surrounded it. The return address bore the logo of the Human Resources Department, and she knew with sickening certainty what it contained. Inside that envelope were Lamar Green's termination papers, prepared that morning in accordance with the new efficiency metrics and cost-cutting measures that the board had approved. The irony was so profound it almost took her breath away. While he sat in her office, speaking with such grace and dignity about his dreams and struggles, she had already signed the documents that would end his employment. The test she had designed was supposed to reveal his character under pressure, but it had instead exposed the grotesque reality of what she had become. Here was a man of unquestionable integrity, demonstrable skill, and noble purpose, and she had been prepared to destroy his livelihood based on productivity metrics that failed to capture any of the qualities that actually mattered. Lamar's voice cut through her internal turmoil with unexpected directness. "Miss Brooks," he said quietly, "I know you're not really asleep." The words hit her like a physical blow. She felt her carefully maintained composure crack, her breathing become irregular, her hands tremble slightly. After several moments of paralyzed silence, she slowly opened her eyes to find him looking at her with an expression of infinite sadness and understanding. "How long have you known?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Since the beginning," Lamar replied with gentle honesty. "People don't fall asleep that suddenly, in the middle of important conversations, and your breathing never got deep enough for real sleep. But mostly, I could sense that you were listening." Samantha felt heat rising in her cheeks, embarrassment, shame, and something else she couldn't quite identify. "Then why did you continue talking? Why did you share all those personal things if you knew it was a test?" Lamar was quiet for a long moment, his gaze thoughtful and free of anger or accusation. "Because I figured this might be the only chance I'd ever have to help someone in your position understand what life is like for someone in mine. And because I thought maybe if you really heard me, really listened, something might change." The simple dignity of his response was devastating. While she had been attempting to manipulate and evaluate him, he had been trying to educate and enlighten her. While she had been testing his character, he had been appealing to hers. "I brought you here to see how you would react when you thought I wasn't paying attention," Samantha admitted, her professional mask finally crumbling completely. "I wanted to know what kind of person you really are underneath the polite workplace facade." "And what did you discover?" Lamar asked, his tone curious rather than confrontational. Samantha looked down at the envelope on her desk, then back at this remarkable man who had somehow maintained his composure and grace, despite discovering that he was being manipulated by someone who held his future in her hands. "I discovered that you're a better person than I am," she said simply, "and that I've become someone I never intended to be." She reached for the envelope with trembling fingers, tearing it open to reveal the termination documents that bore her signature from that morning. The corporate letterhead seemed to mock her as she spread the papers across her desk, where both of them could see the cold, bureaucratic language that would have ended his employment. "These are your termination papers," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I signed them this morning before our meeting. The plan was to fire you after testing your character, using your reaction to justify whatever decision I had already made." Lamar looked at the documents without surprise, his expression remaining calm and thoughtful. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because you deserve to know the truth about what kind of person I am," Samantha replied. "Because you've been honest with me, and I owe you the same honesty in return. Because I want you to understand that your job was never really in jeopardy because of your performance. It was in jeopardy because I've created systems that prioritize efficiency over humanity." She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city below where millions of people were living their lives, pursuing their dreams, facing their challenges. "You talked about your daughter, asking why the system works the way it does. I think I'm starting to understand that the system works this way because people like me have made choices that prioritize profit over people, metrics over meaning, power over purpose. When she turned back to face him, she saw something in his expression that she didn't expect. Not anger or bitterness, but something that looked remarkably like compassion. "What are you going to do now?" Lamar asked. The question hung in the air between them, laden with possibilities that neither of them had imagined when the meeting began. Samantha looked at the termination papers, then at the company mission statement on her wall, then at this man who had somehow managed to maintain his dignity and hope, despite experiencing the kind of systematic inequality that she had helped create and perpetuate. "I'm going to tear up these papers," she said, suiting action to words and ripping the documents into pieces. "And then I'm going to figure out how to become the kind of leader who actually deserves the trust that people like you have placed in me." Lamar watched the destruction of his termination documents with quiet satisfaction, but his expression remained serious. What about the productivity metrics and efficiency standards that led to those papers in the first place? What about all the other employees who might be facing the same situation? His questions revealed the scope of the problem that Samantha was only beginning to understand. This wasn't just about one unfair personnel decision. It was about the entire philosophical framework that had guided her leadership and shaped her company's culture. "I don't know," she admitted. "I don't know how to fix all of this overnight. But I know that what we've been doing isn't working, at least not for the people who matter most. And I know that you've helped me see things that I've been blind to for too long." "Ms. Brooks," Lamar said gently, "can I ask you something?" She nodded, bracing herself for whatever insight or challenge he was about to offer. "What did you want to be when you were 7 years old?" The question caught her completely off guard. She had expected him to ask about policy changes or employment practices or compensation adjustments. Instead, he was asking her to remember her childhood dreams, to reconnect with the person she had been before corporate success had reshaped her priorities. "I wanted to be a teacher," she said after a long pause. "I wanted to help children learn and grow and discover what they were capable of. I thought education was the key to making the world more fair and giving everyone a chance to succeed." "What changed?" Lamar asked simply. The answer to that question would require examining years of choices and compromises, moments when idealism had given way to pragmatism, times when she had chosen personal advancement over principled action. It was a conversation that would take much longer than the time they had remaining. "Everything," she said finally, "but maybe it's not too late to change everything back." As the afternoon sun streamed through the office windows, casting long shadows across the scattered remains of the termination papers, both of them understood that this conversation had marked a turning point. The test had revealed truths that neither had expected, challenged assumptions that both had held, and created possibilities that neither had imagined. The most profound transformation was yet to come. The scattered pieces of Lamar's termination papers lay across Samantha's desk like confetti from a celebration of justice, but the real work was just beginning. She moved to her computer with newfound determination, her fingers dancing across the keyboard as she composed an urgent email to Earl. "Earl, I need you to delete all security footage from my office for today's meeting. Completely. No backup. Copies, no archived files, nothing. This is a direct order and it's effective immediately." Within minutes, her phone buzzed with Earl's response. "Footage deleted as requested. No record remains." Samantha felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Whatever transformation was about to unfold, it would happen without the scrutiny of hidden cameras and corporate surveillance. She turned her attention to the next call, dialing Aaliyah's direct line. "Aaliyah, I need you in my office immediately. Bring every employee evaluation form from the past 5 years, all promotion guidelines, and our current compensation review procedures. And cancel my meetings for the rest of the week." "Ms. Brooks, that's a significant amount of material," Alea's voice carried surprise and concern. Is there a specific issue you're investigating? I'm investigating whether we've been operating fairly, Samantha replied, her voice carrying a conviction that surprised even her. And I suspect we're going to discover that we haven't been. As they waited for Alea to arrive, Samantha found herself looking at Lamar with new eyes. The man sitting across from her wasn't just an employee facing termination. He was someone who had managed to maintain his integrity and compassion despite working within a system designed to grind down people exactly like him. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "How do you do it? How do you stay positive and hopeful when the deck is so obviously stacked against you?" Lamar considered the question carefully before responding. "I think about Zoe," he said simply. "I think about the world I want her to inherit. And I realize that the only way things get better is if people refuse to accept that unfairness is inevitable. Every day I get up and do good work and treat people with respect. I'm making a small bet that character still matters." His answer was so fundamentally different from the cynical pragmatism that dominated corporate culture that Samantha felt something shift inside her chest. A recognition that she had been living according to principles that were not only wrong, but actively harmful. "What if I told you I wanted to offer you a promotion?" she asked. "A real one, not some tokenistic gesture, but a position where you could actually make a difference in how this company treats its employees." Lamar's expression grew cautious. "I'd want to know why, and I'd want to understand what kind of difference I'd actually be able to make." Before Samantha could respond, Alea knocked on the door and entered carrying several thick binders and file folders. Her expression was professionally neutral, but her eyes reflected curiosity about this unusual emergency meeting. "Alea, I want you to sit down because what I'm about to say is going to surprise you," Samantha began. "I've been reviewing our employment practices, and I believe we've created systems that systematically disadvantage our most deserving employees while providing advantages to those who need them least." Alea's eyebrows rose slightly. This was not the kind of conversation she had expected to have with the CEO. "I want you to work with Mr. Green to conduct a comprehensive audit of our promotion processes, compensation structures, and advancement opportunities. I want to understand exactly how our policies affect employees at every level, and I want recommendations for changes that will make this company truly merit-based." "Ms. Brooks," Alea said carefully, "such an audit would likely reveal significant disparities in how we've treated different categories of employees. Are you prepared for those findings?" "I'm not just prepared for them," Samantha replied firmly. "I'm counting on them. Because until we understand how we've failed, we can't begin to fix what's broken." Lamar had been listening to this exchange with growing amazement. The woman who had been prepared to fire him an hour ago was now talking about systematic reform and social justice with the passion of an activist. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I appreciate what you're saying, but I have to ask, what changed? What happened in this office that made you want to transform everything about how this company operates?" Samantha looked at him for a long moment before answering. "You happened, Mr. Green. Your honesty, your dignity, your refusal to be broken by a system that's been crushing people like you for decades. You reminded me of who I used to be and showed me who I could still become." She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a stock options certificate, one of dozens that she had accumulated over the years as her compensation packages had grown more elaborate. The document represented more wealth than most families would see in several lifetimes. "I want to create an employee advancement fund," she announced, holding up the certificate. "I'm going to liquidate a portion of my stock options to establish a program that provides real opportunities for our most dedicated employees. Education assistance, mentorship programs, career development initiatives that actually work for people who need them most." Aaliyah's pen froze over her notepad. Ms. Brooks, that's a very significant financial commitment. The board would need to approve. The board doesn't need to approve my personal financial decisions, Samantha interrupted. This fund will be established independently, though I hope the company will eventually contribute to it as well. We're going to prove that investing in human potential generates returns that go far beyond quarterly profit reports. Lamar shook his head slowly, his expression reflecting disbelief and something that might have been hope. Why would you do that? Why would you risk your own money and possibly your position to help people you barely know? Samantha's answer came from somewhere deep inside her, from the place where her teenage idealism had been buried but not destroyed. Because my daughter, who had every advantage money could provide, never developed the kind of character and purpose that your daughter already possesses at 7 years old. Because I've spent decades accumulating wealth and power while people like you were struggling to survive. Because it's time for me to use my advantages to create advantages for others. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent knock on the door. Earl entered without waiting for permission, his usually composed demeanor showing signs of strain. Ms. Brooks, I apologize for the interruption, but there's been a development, he said, glancing uncertainly at Lamar and Alea. The board has called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. Apparently, there are concerns about recent performance metrics and cost-cutting measures. Samantha felt her stomach drop. The timing was too coincidental to be accidental. Someone had been monitoring her activities, perhaps through means she hadn't considered. The board's sudden interest in performance metrics suggested that her decision to spare Lamar might have triggered larger scrutiny. What kind of concerns? She asked. Her voice carefully controlled. I don't have details, Earl replied, but the meeting notice mentioned leadership accountability and fiduciary responsibility. The tone suggests they're questioning some recent decisions. The implications were clear. If the board was challenging her leadership, they might try to reverse any changes she attempted to implement. Worse, they might try to remove her from her position entirely, leaving employees like Lamar more vulnerable than ever. Earl, I need you to prepare something for me, Samantha said, her mind racing through possibilities. I want detailed documentation of every employee termination from the past year, organized by department and demographic categories. And I want comparative data showing the advancement rates for different groups within our organization. That's a considerable amount of information, Earl said carefully. How detailed do you want the analysis to be? Detailed enough to prove that we've been making personnel decisions based on bias rather than merit, Samantha replied. Detailed enough to show the board exactly what kind of company we've become? Lamar leaned forward in his chair, his expression serious. Ms. Brooks, if you're planning to challenge the board on these issues, you need to understand that you're putting yourself at risk. People with power don't usually give it up willingly, especially when they're being told they've used it wrongly. I know, Samantha said simply, but I also know that if I don't take this risk, nothing will change. Employees like you will continue to be undervalued and underpaid, while people like me accumulate wealth we don't need and power we don't deserve. She stood and walked to the window again, looking out at the city below. I've been thinking about what you said about your daughter's questions, about why some people have so much while others have so little. I think it's time for someone in my position to provide some answers. Aaliyah had been taking notes throughout the conversation, but now she set down her pen and looked directly at Samantha. Ma'am, if you're serious about this, you need to understand the scope of what you're proposing. We're not just talking about individual policy changes. We're talking about fundamentally altering the company's approach to human resources, compensation, and corporate culture. That's exactly what I'm talking about, Samantha confirmed. And I want Mr. Green to help lead that transformation. She turned back to face them both, her expression resolute. Lamar, I'm offering you the position of Director of Employee Advocacy. Your job would be to identify systemic inequities in our organization and develop solutions that actually work for the people who need them most. You'd report directly to me, and you'd have the authority to investigate any department, review any policy, and recommend any changes you think are necessary. The offer hung in the air like a challenge to everything that had come before. It represented not just a career opportunity for Lamar, but a fundamental shift in corporate priorities that would either transform the company or destroy Samantha's leadership. "And if the board tries to stop you?" Lamar asked. Samantha smiled. For the first time since the meeting had begun, a smile that carried both determination and peace. "Then we'll find out whether shareholders care more about short-term profits or long-term sustainability. We'll discover whether corporate America is ready for leadership that prioritizes people over profit margins." As the afternoon sunlight began to fade outside the office windows, the three of them understood that they were no longer just planning personnel changes. They were preparing for a confrontation that would determine not just their individual futures, but the very soul of the organization they all served. The real test of character was about to begin. The company auditorium had never felt more charged with anticipation. Word of the emergency all-hands meeting had spread throughout TechVantage Solutions like wildfire, carrying with it whispers of change, rumors of confrontation, and speculation about what had prompted the CEO to call every employee together on such short notice. Samantha stood backstage, her hands steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to attempt. In her briefcase were the documents that Earl and Aaliyah had compiled through the night, statistical proof of the systematic inequities that had shaped her company's culture, evidence that would either spark transformation or end her career. The microphone felt substantial in her hand as she walked onto the stage, looking out at hundreds of faces representing every level and department of her organization. In the front row, she spotted Lamar sitting next to Shane and Robin, his expression calm but alert. Further back, she saw board members who had arrived early, their faces reflecting skepticism and concern about this departure from normal corporate communication. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "I've called this meeting because I owe you an apology, an explanation, and a commitment to change that will affect every person in this room." A murmur rippled through the audience. Emergency meetings were typically about layoffs or restructuring, not apologies from the CEO. "For the past several years, I've led this company according to principles that I believed served our collective interests," she continued. "I've made decisions based on efficiency metrics, productivity measurements, and cost-benefit analyses that I thought represented sound business judgment." She paused, allowing her gaze to sweep across the assembled employees, maintenance workers, administrative assistants, mid-level managers, senior executives, all of them part of an organization that she was about to admit had failed them. "I was wrong," she said simply, "and yesterday I discovered just how wrong I've been." The silence in the auditorium was complete. Employees exchanged glances, unsure what to make of this unprecedented admission from someone who had never shown vulnerability or uncertainty in public. "Yesterday, I met with Lamar Green, a maintenance worker who has been with our company for 3 years, Samantha continued, her voice growing stronger. "I had called him to my office ostensibly to discuss a promotion opportunity, but in reality, I was planning to test his character before terminating his employment." The collective intake of breath was audible. Employees turned to look at Lamar, who maintained his composure despite suddenly finding himself at the center of corporate drama. "What I discovered during that meeting challenged every assumption I had made about leadership, fairness, and what it means to build a successful organization," Samantha said. "I discovered that I had become the kind of leader who viewed employees as resources to be optimized rather than people to be valued." She reached into her briefcase and pulled out the first set of documents that Earl had prepared. These are our promotion statistics from the past 5 years, broken down by department and demographic categories. What they show is a pattern of advancement that consistently favors employees who already have advantages, while systematically excluding those who need opportunities most. The projector screen behind her displayed charts and graphs that told a story of institutional bias that many employees had experienced, but few had seen documented so starkly. Lamar Green has never missed a day of work in 3 years, she continued. He has consistently received the highest performance ratings from his supervisors. He has been specifically requested by multiple departments for important projects. He has gone above and beyond his job description countless times without recognition or additional compensation. She clicked to the next slide, showing Lamar's personnel file alongside his termination papers. And yesterday morning, I signed documents to fire him because his productivity scores were 2% below newly implemented benchmarks that were designed to justify reducing our workforce. The revelation sent shockwaves through the audience. Employees who had worried about their own job security suddenly understood that even exemplary performance was no protection against arbitrary corporate decisions. But something happened during our meeting that changed everything, Samantha said, her voice taking on a different quality, warmer, more personal, more human. When I pretended to fall asleep to test his character, Lamar began speaking from his heart about his daughter, his dreams, and his unshakable faith in the possibility of justice. She looked directly at Lamar, who was listening with the same quiet dignity he had shown in her office. What I heard was someone who possessed qualities that I had lost somewhere in my climb to the top: integrity, compassion, and a belief that work should serve a purpose greater than personal enrichment. The auditorium remained silent, but the quality of that silence had changed. Employees were no longer just listening to a corporate announcement. They were witnessing something unprecedented: authentic leadership that acknowledged failure and demanded transformation. Today, I want to announce several immediate changes to how this company operates, Samantha said, her voice rising with conviction. Changes that will ensure that merit is recognized, that opportunities are distributed fairly, and that every employee is valued for their contributions rather than judged by metrics that fail to capture their true worth. The real revelation was about to begin. Effective immediately, I am establishing the Employee Advancement Initiative, Samantha announced, her voice carrying across the hushed auditorium. This program will provide educational assistance, mentorship opportunities, and career development. Resources specifically designed to serve employees who have been overlooked by our traditional advancement systems. She gestured toward Lamar, who had been looking increasingly uncomfortable with the attention focused on him. Lamar Green will serve as our first Director of Employee Advocacy, reporting directly to me with the authority to investigate any policy, review any decision, and recommend any changes necessary to ensure fairness and equity throughout our organization. The applause that erupted was immediate and sustained, with employees throughout the auditorium rising to their feet. But Samantha noticed that several board members remained seated, their expressions ranging from concern to outright hostility. Furthermore, she continued once the applause had subsided, I am personally funding this initiative with a contribution of $5 million from my own stock options. This is not corporate charity. This is an investment in human potential that I believe will generate returns far beyond anything we can measure in quarterly reports. The magnitude of her personal financial commitment sent another wave of surprise through the audience. Corporate executives were known for demanding sacrifice from employees while protecting their own compensation, not for risking their personal wealth to create opportunities for others. As Samantha outlined the specific components of the new program, tuition assistance that didn't require upfront payment, professional development courses scheduled to accommodate hourly workers, mentorship programs that connected promising employees with senior leadership. She noticed movement in the back of the auditorium. Board Chairman Richard Blackstone was making his way toward the stage, his expression grim and determined. Behind him followed two other board members, their presence transforming what had been a celebratory moment into something that felt more like a confrontation. "Ms. Brooks," Blackstone's voice carried clearly without amplification, interrupting her presentation, "I need to speak with you immediately. This meeting needs to adjourn while the board discusses these unprecedented announcements." The auditorium fell silent, employees sensing that they were witnessing a power struggle that would determine the future of the company and potentially their own livelihoods. Samantha looked at Blackstone for a long moment before responding. "Mr. Blackstone, I appreciate the board's interest in these initiatives, but this meeting will continue as scheduled. These employees deserve to hear about changes that affect their futures. These changes haven't been approved by the board." Blackstone replied, his voice carrying an edge of authority that he clearly expected to end the discussion. "You're making financial commitments and organizational changes that exceed your authority as CEO." The confrontation was unfolding in front of hundreds of witnesses, each side staking out positions that would be difficult to retreat from. Samantha realized that this moment would define not just her leadership, but the entire culture of the organization. "With respect, Mr. Blackstone," she said, her voice remaining calm but growing stronger, "I'm making changes that align with our company's stated mission and values. Unless the board is prepared to argue that fairness and equity are inconsistent with our corporate purposes, these initiatives will proceed as announced." Blackstone's face reddened slightly. "The board is calling an immediate vote of no confidence in your leadership. Your position as CEO is hereby under review, and all administrative decisions are suspended, pending the outcome of that review." The words hung in the air like a declaration of war. Employees throughout the auditorium looked back and forth between their CEO and the board members, understanding that they were witnessing a battle for the soul of their workplace. But instead of backing down, Samantha smiled, an expression that seemed to draw strength from the challenge rather than wilting under it. "Then let's have that vote," she said clearly. "Let's put it to the employees of this company whether they want leadership that prioritizes human dignity or leadership that treats them as expendable resources. Let's see whether the people who actually do the work want a CEO who recognizes their value or one who reduces them to numbers on a spreadsheet." The suggestion was unprecedented in corporate history, allowing employees to influence executive decisions, treating their opinions as meaningful in discussions about company leadership. But as Samantha looked out at the hundreds of faces in the auditorium, she saw something that gave her hope. They were standing, not just a few employees, but row after row of people rising to their feet in a show of support that was impossible to ignore. Maintenance workers, administrative assistants, middle managers, even some senior executives, all of them demonstrating their preference for leadership that valued their humanity over their productivity metrics. Lamar had also stood, and when their eyes met across the auditorium, he nodded once, a gesture of respect and solidarity that carried more weight than any board resolution. "Mr. Blackstone," Samantha said, her voice now carrying the confidence that came from knowing she was fighting for something larger than personal position, "I think the employees have spoken. The question now is whether the board is prepared to listen. The transformation had begun, and there would be no going back. Effective immediately, I am establishing the Employee Advancement Initiative," Samantha announced, her voice carrying across the hushed auditorium. "This program will provide educational assistance, mentorship opportunities, and career development resources specifically designed to serve employees who have been overlooked by our traditional advancement systems. She gestured toward Lamar, who had been looking increasingly uncomfortable with the attention focused on him. Lamar Green will serve as our first Director of Employee Advocacy, reporting directly to me with the authority to investigate any policy, review any decision, and recommend any changes necessary to ensure fairness and equity throughout our organization. The applause that erupted was immediate and sustained, with employees throughout the auditorium rising to their feet. But Samantha noticed that several board members remained seated, their expressions ranging from concern to outright hostility. Furthermore, she continued once the applause had subsided, I am personally funding this initiative with a contribution of $5 million from my own stock options. This is not corporate charity. This is an investment in human potential that I believe will generate returns far beyond anything we can measure in quarterly reports. The magnitude of her personal financial commitment sent another wave of surprise through the audience. Corporate executives were known for demanding sacrifice from employees while protecting their own compensation, not for risking their personal wealth to create opportunities for others. As Samantha outlined the specific components of the new program, tuition assistance that didn't require upfront payment, professional development courses scheduled to accommodate hourly workers, mentorship programs that connected promising employees with senior leadership, she noticed movement in the back of the auditorium. Board Chairman Richard Blackstone was making his way toward the stage, his expression grim and determined. Behind him followed two other board members, their presence transforming what had been a celebratory moment into something that felt more like a confrontation. Ms. Brooks, Blackstone's voice carried clearly without amplification, interrupting her presentation. I need to speak with you immediately. This meeting needs to adjourn while the board discusses these unprecedented announcements. The auditorium fell silent, employees sensing that they were witnessing a power struggle that would determine the future of the company and potentially their own livelihoods. Samantha looked at Blackstone for a long moment before responding. Mr. Blackstone, I appreciate the board's interest in these initiatives, but this meeting will continue as scheduled. These employees deserve to hear about changes that affect their futures. These changes haven't been approved by the board. Blackstone replied, his voice carrying an edge of authority that he clearly expected to end the discussion. You're making financial commitments and organizational changes that exceed your authority as CEO. The confrontation was unfolding in front of hundreds of witnesses, each side staking out positions that would be difficult to retreat from. Samantha realized that this moment would define not just her leadership, but the entire culture of the organization. With respect, Mr. Blackstone, she said, her voice remaining calm but growing stronger, I'm making changes that align with our company's stated mission and values. Unless the board is prepared to argue that fairness and equity are inconsistent with our corporate purposes, these initiatives will proceed as announced. Blackstone's face reddened slightly. The board is calling an immediate vote of no confidence in your leadership. Your position as CEO is hereby under review, and all administrative decisions are suspended pending the outcome of that review. The words hung in the air like a declaration of war. Employees throughout the auditorium looked back and forth between their CEO and the board members, understanding that they were witnessing a battle for the soul of their workplace. But instead of backing down, Samantha smiled, an expression that seemed to draw strength from the challenge rather than wilting under it. Then let's have that vote, she said clearly. Let's put it to the employees of this company whether they want leadership that prioritizes human dignity or leadership that treats them as expendable resources. Let's see whether the people who actually do the work want a CEO who recognizes their value or one who reduces them to numbers on a spreadsheet. The suggestion was unprecedented in corporate history, allowing employees to influence executive decisions, treating their opinions as meaningful in discussions about company leadership. But as Samantha looked out at the hundreds of faces in the auditorium, she saw something that gave her hope. They were standing, not just a few employees, but row after row of people rising to their feet in a show of support that was impossible to ignore. Maintenance workers, administrative assistants, middle managers, even some senior executives, all of them demonstrating their preference for leadership that valued their humanity over their productivity metrics. Lamar had also stood, and when their eyes met across the auditorium, he nodded once, a gesture of respect and solidarity that carried more weight than any board resolution. "Mr. Blackstone," Samantha said, her voice now carrying the confidence that came from knowing she was fighting for something larger than personal position, "I think the employees have spoken. The question now is whether the board is prepared to listen." The transformation had begun, and there would be no going back.